Our next guest is from Syria, Mr. Zaid Muhammad. He was a student in Aleppo, and since 2011, when the revolution broke out, actively involved. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his personal involvement, about his ideas about non-violence in the context of the Syrian conflict, and his looks for the future, your ideas for the future on this topic. Next to me is Ferdinand. I'm very happy you have your name on your blouse, which makes my task very easy. You're the sidekick, but you're not a real sidekick. You're really the main kick, because you're going to interview Zaid for the first 15 minutes on several topics, and then I will join in.
Thank you.
Zaid has provided some pictures which he has taken during his time in Aleppo and during his experience in the Syrian revolution. And by looking at these photos, we will take a look at the experience he's had during that revolution. So if we could start with the first picture.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, obviously in this picture we see an image which is kind of representative of the media imagery we tend to get from revolutions. Could you tell me a bit about what this image means personally to you?
Yes, sure. So I took this picture in Aleppo city, actually in 2013. And if you may look at it, it shares the same photographic characteristics of photos coming out from Syria. War, destruction, battles, etc. However, if we went deeper in the story of the man in this picture, we can find a lot of information. This was, yeah.
Exactly, because if we take a look at the second photo, well, this is the same man, and Zaid can tell us a lot about who this person actually is and what his personal experience with him was.
Exactly. So this man was Abu Omar, one of our friends and comrades. He joined the Syrian revolution in 2011 as a peaceful protester, as tens of thousands of Syrians. And after a year of peacefully struggling in the city, he was one of the people who decided to take up arms and join the armed resistance against the Assad state. Abu Omar became a leader in the armed resistance in the Free Syrian Army. And then he fought in battles against the Assad state and also against ISIS. As we see them both as two faces of oppression in Syria. Abu Omar was killed during a battle in 2014, in January 2014, fighting ISIS. He was killed by an ISIS sniper. And this was a long way before the international coalition against ISIS was formed. It was a battle to liberate Aleppo city from ISIS.
All right, so as you can see, Zaid has a lot of personal experience with the Syrian revolution. In the next picture, we can talk a bit about the origins of the revolution. Well, I guess this is probably the best for you to tell. What do we see in this picture? Whose portrait is that and what is being done to it?
So I took this picture in Aleppo city, Aleppo University, 2012, during the peaceful phase of the Syrian revolution. And actually you're seeing people attacking the photo of the dictator Hafez al-Assad, the father of dictator Bashar al-Assad. Before going deeper into this topic, I would like to introduce some information that you may not find on the mainstream coverage on Syria, quoting Yassin al-Haj Saleh. He's a Syrian intellectual. Syria has been under the state of exhibition since 1963. Al-Ba'ath Party took over power, Hafez al-Assad took over power in 1970s. And in 1980s, the Assad regime committed horrible crimes against the Syrian community, where 20,000 to 30,000 Syrian citizens were killed, and the country since then was under the circumstances of politicide. like the fear was spread all over the country. In 2012, Bashar al-Assad took over power, and ironically, the republic became a kingdom. He's the son of Hafiz al-Assad. In 2007, more than 30% of Syrians were under the poverty line of $1 a day. And so this shows what's the meaning of living in circumstances of fear. We used to call Syria the kingdom of fear. You couldn't speak your mind, even at your home, even at your best friends. You couldn't just speak. You might disappear, you might be killed or tortured to death.
Can I just ask you a personal question? Because you were involved in the revolution in 2011. I appreciate you were a student, so you were, and you still are, very young. Before the revolution started, were you already involved in a community of non-violence? Were you already active? Or you say it's very difficult, and of course I understand that and the risks that were involved. But before the revolution, what was your life like?
Before the revolution, I was a student at Aleppo University, and actually I think the only thing that I did is that I didn't join Al-Ba'ath Party. That was the only thing, and I was interrogated for that. So that was the meaning of politicide in the country. You can do nothing, you can form nothing, and you are always under this totalitarian and extermination state, which is ready to do anything to stay in power.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right, so as you can see, as Zaid described very accurately, there was a lot of fear living in Syria, which probably contributed to the start of the revolution. In the next picture, we can see how the early stages of the revolution looked like. Can you tell us a bit about what is shown in this picture, which you also took?
Yeah. This picture I took in Aleppo city 2012. And you can see the very small number of young women and men that were joining the peaceful demonstrations at that time. So at that period, we were gathering, secretly coordinating to go to a demonstration for maybe 1 to maximum 5 minutes in the city, and then we need to split up before the security forces or the secret police come and take us. And if you looked at the picture, you can see that there are no the faces are not clear. Mm-hmm. And that's because if your face was shown in any picture or video, you might end up in jail, tortured, and killed.
You also told me a bit about the rather dual identity, or as you described it, what was left of your personal identity as you became more and more intertwined with the resistance?
So actually, by the time, since the beginning of the Syrian revolution, your personal identity and individual identity becomes smaller and smaller, and what really matters is the public interest, is the public good. Mm-hmm. Once the demonstration starts, it was starting by one brave person, mm-hmm. and with the first chant, the other young people, women and men in the street will join him, and then you will be melted down in the crowd. It's not about you. It's not who is doing this, who is protesting, who is taking the photo. It's more about what are we going to achieve. And we could sometimes recognize each other in the streets from the smiles on the faces. We knew that we might face torture, we might face death or imprisonment, etc. But the hope was to get to a better future for the country. And if you looked at, personally, very personally speaking, if you looked at the flag that is shown in the photo, it is a flag that combines the Syrian revolutions and independence flag with also the Palestinian flag. I am Palestinian, I was born in Syria. And also in the early stages, we knew that the fate of the Syrian and the Palestinian struggles are connected. And it is also shown in this picture.
Can I just, one question? Also, again, a personal question, because you describe how you get absorbed by the masses, the demonstrations. But still, there apparently is room for a decision by yourself. Like, for example, you mentioned your friend who joined the Free Syrian Army and who got killed. But you chose to stay with the demonstrators, with the non-violent movement. So could you say a little bit about this room for decision and the choices still that can be made in the situation?
Well, actually, when the Syrian revolution started, it all started peacefully. And I was one of tens of thousands of Syrians who decided just to take responsibility of what's happening in the country and to join the demonstrations. I decided to be a protester and also a media activist to show Syrians and the world what is really happening in the streets of Syria. So that was my decision. But by oppressing the people, by brutally killing the whole population, there are some people who decided to take up arms. And my personal belief is that, yes, the people do have the right to defend themselves. I choose to be a media activist. That was my personal decision. And many other Syrians chose many other ways to resist and defend their country.
All right, in the next picture we could also see, well, as Zaid mentioned, as you become one of the masses, this gives a clear illustration of how big those masses actually are. Where did you take this photo, Zaid?
It was during the peaceful phase of the Syrian revolution in Aleppo, 2012. And you can compare actually both pictures. You can see like the small numbers at the beginning and how these numbers were increased. Like the more people are being imprisoned, the more people are killed, the more people are joining the streets. And actually, around 10% of Syrians joined the peaceful struggle. 10%. It is one of the biggest numbers and percentage in the history of the mankind.
Obviously, as we all may know, the Syrian revolution soon became violent as the Assad regime responded. The next picture gives us a very clear representation of what those reprimands actually resulted in. What can you tell us about this picture, Zaid?
Well, I took this picture in 2013. It was after the armed resistance entered Aleppo city. This man, you look at him, he came back home to find that his residential area was targeted by an airstrike. So he rushed home, he rushed to his apartment looking for his little son. He couldn't find him. He was searching and then he found the bicycle. He came to the balcony embarrassing his bicycle. And he seemed unconscious or conscious in a way that I don't understand. And then he was saying like, where is my little son? Where is he? And nobody could answer. Nobody could do anything. We were just looking at him. And that was the question actually of hundreds of thousands of Syrians. Where are our beloved ones? And why all of this is happening? So, and that was actually the two options in Assad's Syria. It is either to live under a humiliation and oppression, or you will face a genocide. You know, it's either politicide or a genocide. And I just want to add one thing to clarify this. And actually, one of the slogans of the Assad regime before the revolution was Al-Assad lil-Abad, like Assad forever. After the revolution, this slogan changed into Al-Assad أو نحرق البلد, Al-Assad أو لا أحد. It's either Assad or we burn the country. It's either Assad or nobody. And this shows the mentality and of how this regime looks and thinks like.
Can I break in again? Because you as a media activist, you made all these pictures, this very heartbreaking picture. What did you do with the picture? What were your channels? Where did you send these pictures?
So at the beginning, we were on social media. Like we were active on social media. I started to send some footages to public Facebook pages. But like by time, we started to cooperate actually with other Syrians across the country and other brave journalists around the world who wanted to show the reality of what is happening in Syria, and who were like a great help for us.
If we take a look at the next picture, obviously the Assad regime response was incredibly cruel. Nevertheless, there were still people among them was this person who Zaid photographed, who still persisted in non-violent resistance. Can you tell us a bit about him, Zaid?
So this man, his name was Yahya Sharbaji. Do you remember the photo our friend Mazen showed? It was from Daria, people holding flowers. This man and his friends had the initiative to distribute flowers and water on the regime gangs who came to oppress the demonstrators. He joined the Syrian revolution in 2011, and I'm quoting him here. He said, "To be murdered is better to become a murderer." How does the Assad regime respond to this man and his friends? They were arrested. He was arrested in September 2011, and he was killed by torture in 2013. Nevertheless, his family and all of us didn't know anything about him until 2 months ago. 2 months ago, the Assad regime released names of people who were killed in its prisons. He was from Daria, and alongside with 1,000 people who were killed from the same small town in Syria. And I just want to clarify here that these people were our bridges and towards freedom, towards democracy, towards dignity and justice. They were the bridges to connect all of Syrians together. But what the Assad regime did is to cut these bridges by imprisoning them and killing them.
Yeah. One question. You were active for 5 years in Syria before you came to the Netherlands. What were your sources of inspiration in terms of designing your strategies? Were you in touch with people like Mazen or other institutions that assisted you in defining your strategy?
Actually, at the beginning, we had no, I'm speaking of myself, I had no strategy. We didn't even trust the closest people in our community. We didn't know who's with the secret police and who's not. Mm-hmm. And so it was hard for many Syrians to gain access, to know more and to develop strategies. We had to deal with the situation on the ground. Mm-hmm. But by the time we could connect with people around the world, and it happened. We shared experiences, we got support, and etc. But it came by time. Yeah. We learned from other Syrians, but also from many amazing people around the world.
Mm-hmm. And if you look back now, which of course is a horrible thing to do and easy, would there be things that you would have been done differently at the beginning?
Can you rephrase the question, please?
When you started the revolution,
yeah,
and you were immediately actively involved, with the knowledge you have now about strategies in non-violent resistance, would you have done things differently?
Well, actually, this is a hard question.
I know. Yeah, it's a horrible question.
Because, going back to that time, I know that the only thing that I believe and I'm sure that I should do is to take responsibility, to join the people in the streets and to try to do something. Of course, I do know that many mistakes were made. However, I do believe also that that's not the reason why the country was crashed in the first place. It was not crashed only by the Assad state. It was crashed by also the international dynamics that destroyed our people and empowered this oppressor.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Going back to what you told us about the cruelty of the Assad regime and the way it wanted to destroy bridges between the Syrian people, can you tell us a bit about the person in this picture?
Sure. So on the left is Alois Brunner. Alois Brunner was a Nazi officer. And he was the assistant on the man on the right side, Adolf Eichmann. who was responsible and one of the main organizers, actually, for the Holocaust. Bruno was held responsible for sending 100,000 Jews to concentration camps in Eastern Europe. He could escape Germany after World War II, and he came to Syria, where he was granted asylum by al-Ba'ath regime. He was granted asylum by al-Ba'ath regime, then Hafiz al-Assad. In exchange, he could get asylum and the salary in exchange for teaching the Syrian security forces the interrogation techniques that was used by the Nazis in the World War II. And this shows that the mentality of the regime was not an immediate or a random response in 2011. It was a systematic strategy that was developed and empowered since day one they was empowered.
Going on to the last picture, you told me a lot about first what was visible in this picture, and then, well, it's also a bit of a symbolicness regarding, well, what is left of the people and the background in this picture. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So I took this picture in 2012. It was it was still in the peaceful phase of the Syrian revolution. This young man, Amir Barakat, that you see him held on hands, he was killed by Assad security forces while peacefully protesting, demanding our rights for freedom, for justice, and for dignity. This is his funeral, and after the revolution, the funerals became demonstrations. And I will use the pointer here, just to point out to something, to a person. Several months later, this is one of our friends and comrades. You see the guy with the glasses. This man, after several months, he took up arms to defend himself, his beloved people, and his country, and he was killed during a battle with the Assad regime. A year later, this man, he was kidnapped by ISIS. He also took up arms against Assad, and he was kidnapped by ISIS. Several years after this, you look at all of these people in this picture, and you know that they they might be killed, might be arrested, might be tortured, might be forcefully displaced inside the country or became refugees outside the country. And all of the buildings that you see here, they were destroyed and then occupied again by the Assad state. This picture for me is not a question just of the past. It is a question of the past. It is a question for the responsibility of the past, why all of these people were killed. But it is also a question for the future, for our shared future. What world do we want to live in? What bridges do we want to build towards this world? Do we want to build the bridges with freedom, with justice, with dignity, not just for us, but for the next generation? Or do you want to not to do anything and to wait until all of this destroy? I know that the time is really tight. I'll just add one small thing. In 2013, after this man was kidnapped and the two others were killed, there was a deal. It was called the chemical deal. And it was between the US and Russia, inspired by the Israeli occupation, which basically meant that Assad can stay in power after killing more than 1,000 Syrians within seconds. He can stay in power, but he can keep killing us with all of the other weapons. Is that the world that we want to live in? I think that it is our responsibility, my and your responsibility, just to think about this. And thank you for listening.
Thank you. Very good.